this is Pops, and this is like third degrees of separation of reaction. I promise you, I'm actually only going to react to something said on a stream, which isn't relevant to this reaction stream that they were rewatching. But it was over on Black Angus. It is Light and Rander, the Outlawed Thoughts. They're talking about CGC books, making absurd comments about CGC and graded books and what they are and why they are and everything else. So let's just set this record straight, okay? CGC is a company that they call it slabbing. They basically put the book in plastic. This is the standard grading scale. Now, the grading scale itself has existed for as far as I've been in comics. Overstreet Price Guide and many other books have a category of what is a near mint book and a fine book and all those kinds. All these categories have existed. What they did was they become a professional grading service. They encapsulate the book in plastic, so it's sealed and certified, and they have professional graders that standardize the criteria. They have criteria that's listed, and they can explain in their own videos and otherwise like what books, what the differences of different things are. Now, why is that important? Especially with older books, especially when you get into expensive books, things like that, and you're going to be squabbling over quality more than anything else to determine maybe a valuation, if it has to go to auction, things like that. We can agree on a third-party certifier. We can agree on someone right now. This could happen before CGC. Like when I was in college, if you went down to the comic shop and you were debating with the owner, you know, he has the leverage more than I do because he's the owner. But let's say we had a third person come in. You've seen this on like Pawn Stars where they have a person come in. They both agree to that person's expertise and they say, oh, this is what it's worth. Let me explain your condition, history, whatever the case may be. That's exactly what CGC represents for the comic book industry, but it's become massive business, particularly because the higher grades are exceedingly rare. And a 9.8 is sort of the standard near mint perfect book that you can get. Now, there are 9.9s and there are 10s. Those are, those are unicorns. Now, the condition and the style of the book sometimes has improvements based on the material. So there are books that have like a leather cover or like a plastic lenticular cover and things like that. So they might have a disproportionate larger number of 9.8, 9.9s, and 9.10s than let's say a regular book. And especially older books, especially books that were on the newsstand, things like that. So that's what the scale is, and that's why it exists. Now, what on earth? Why would Pops even waste his time? Why are we talking about all this? I know. You guys, sometimes this is what you're going to get. You get just down the rabbit hole with me. This is this crazy Ripaverse, Ethan Van Sciver, hate watching, reaction watching nonsense, right? I turned it on for a couple minutes. I'm just curious on what was happening here. It's kind of, again, keeping up with all of the ridiculous levels of things going, right? So they had this quick comment. Hope you guys can hear it okay.
Sales CGC is like the quality of the comic, right?
So they're talking about books. Ethan Van Sciver is bringing up the fact that they had a certain number of graded books, and suddenly there's a whole bunch more than he originally said. He didn't. I don't know anything about why suddenly you said there were X number of books, but now there are more books, and that is kind of sketchy, by the way. If you say the print run is there's 1,000 collectibles, and now suddenly there's like 500 more, that's kind of a problem, right? Now, with that said, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to get to these comments, okay?
Sales CGC is like the quality of the comic, right?
CGC is the company that's certifying the grade of the book. It is slab, meaning that it's encapsulated in a plastic case. You can go over to my channel. I'll put a link in the description of a CGC book or two so you can see. I just did one on Ninja Turtles.
Or as far as like the paper.
It's the graded comic that's slabbed, so it remains pristine.
Okay, so again, the condition of the book itself. I mean, obviously, we're talking about these modern, brand new printed books. The highest grade you're going to get most of the time is a 9.8. That's what that means, because it's pretty rare that you see the 9.9s and 10s.
And so almost all of them at best will get a 9.8. There's like almost never a 10.0, which is wacky given that like these are fresh from the printer.
It's not wacky at all. It's actually the norm, and I know that surprises people. But the first thing is, and I assume that CGC would be a better explanation of this than I am. But if you get a magnifying glass, I use a jeweler's eyepiece and you can look closer, especially cards. It's really bad with cards. But if you look really close with a magnifying glass at that edging, the way the printing works, the way the glue and the binding's done, things like that, you'll see frays, you'll see separation, you'll see unevenness and things like that. So whatever the master version would be is a 10. The difference to a 9 is such a very small blemish, but there is a blemish, and then there is to the 9.8. And with a naked eye, sometimes it's hard to see. But I explained to someone recently, I said, literally, it can be like the way the fraying and stuff is at the bottom left of that spine, because that's what's going to be moving around the most with the shipping from the printer and then to you in the bag, things like that. So, and then that doesn't get me started on like actual books that go to comic book stores where they flop around in cardboard boxes and they're manhandled and things like that. So just general information, folks.
There's like almost never a 10.0, which is wacky given that like these are fresh from the printer and then I guess
comic
verified.
book grading, like much other areas of grading, is a complete and utter scam.
Yeah.
Okay. This is complete garbage. Okay. Grading is grading, right? If you go into a car dealership and they talk about the quality of the car and you're seeing scratches and bumps and nicks, you have a discrepancy over the quality of the thing, right? So the reason the grading is there is because someone wants to outsource the service and have an agreed upon thing. With the age of the internet, a way you can certify something, it can change hands easier and faster. It makes it a whole lot easier to do over a larger population of customers than a local store. Like if you go down to your local store and he's an expert in comic books and he has this standard of what grading is, so be it. I went to 4 different shops before I sent my books off to be graded. And I only had one person, one comic owner that would actually help me. Most of them either don't know anything, they're not interested in doing it, and you can tell, or they're just trying to get over on you. Okay. It's not a scam. It's the certificate. You're paying for that thing. Now, this is only going to get double down because I mean, obviously Lighton doesn't really understand, or this is not something he believes in.
People
It's basically,
yeah. I was gonna say people are putting like damaged shit in the slab and then I guess reselling the good one and shit. There's all sorts of wacky shit going on.
Okay, so that is an allusion to a recent thing that's happened where somebody had figured out how to crack one open and do a swap, and they sent it in as a reholder, which means you can send your book in not to be graded, but to have it put into a new case. I guess some of those books got through without being checked. They were done for reholders. They weren't actually being graded that way. It's not like somebody took a 9.8 out and then put in a crappy book and then sold it that way. I mean, that's the type of fraud that can happen, just like fraudulent autographs or anything like that. But that's not what happened from CGC. The CGC thing that happened, the scandal, if you look it up, is the fact that it's the reholder, the recasing thing, and those books were not being checked properly to realize that they didn't match or there was a discrepancy. And that's on YouTube, by the way. You should do a little bit of due diligence when you're buying something, especially if it's expensive, to make sure that it appears to be legit.
it's also just the fact that like condition is subjective.
If there are stress marks on the spine, there are stress marks on the spine. If there's edging issues, if there's rolling issues, if the white is showing, if there's folds and creases, this is what the grading scale is and is for. It's not subjective. You may have an opinion that you think it's more serious than another, but if CGC has the standard, they're very clear. They have videos on this. I've learned a ton about like how many stress marks you'll have, if it's a color breaking stress mark, if it's a little bit of edge here, a little bit of edge there. And I plan on doing more videos of this because clearly people want to think what they have is worth more than it actually is. And the problem is, if you go back to that scale I showed in the beginning, if you notice, we can go all the way down to a 9. 9.0 is still near mint. That's because of the level of detail within the near mint category. They're not trying to say your book is worthless. They're trying to say most things, especially in the modern time, is going to be near mint. But the only way to delineate of like a perfect copy versus a near mint copy is to have certain criteria. And those criteria and those standards do exist. And I'm sorry that Leighton Rander didn't know that and is telling everybody the wrong information.
So you're basically paying a group of people who claim to be experts on condition, but it's like, well, what is that?
Yeah, that is exactly what that is that you're doing.
Like, to me, Ethan Van Sciver, like, he's a comic book expert, right? Like Shane Davis, these are comic book. So shouldn't they be able to tell you what the condition of a book is?
No, absolutely not. Okay, so he's conflating two different things. So Ethan Van Sciver and Shane Davis are comic book creators. They are artists, they are writers, they are creators. That doesn't mean they know anything about condition. Maybe they do. I don't know. I don't know enough about them personally. I can tell you from my experience with creators, most creators don't give a rat's behind about the condition. They are more aware of it now, especially for things that they use in their own private collection, or like what is being talked about here is the creator will have books sent off to CGC to have them graded so they can sell them. So in that realm, yes. But for me to believe that Ethan's going to look at a book and he's going to tell me, oh, this is a 9.8, this is not a 9.2, 9.4. I don't know that I believe that Ethan is even interested in understanding or knowing that. That's completely different than the professional grading service at CGC. If you don't believe in it and you don't want to buy graded books or you don't believe in it, that is totally fine. That is your thing. But don't demean it because you don't understand it, or don't try to treat it as though it's trivial just because you think that those quote are not experts. If it is not your thing, there is a way to learn expertise at it. So whether it be the binding and learning stress marks and terminology and how many there are, what the criteria and the standards are. Okay. And again, this is about outsourcing the certification to a third party so we can agree on the condition and terms of this particular collectible. And this is the same for cards, coins, and otherwise. I can tell you, I don't know lick about a coin, but I know that they have a standard that I can look up and try to research and better educate myself on what the difference would be. Action figures and things like that, video games, they have scales. You can look at the price of action figures and video games, and like scores like 80 and 85 are atrociously priced. I'm like, wow, what would a 90 or 100? Okay, same kind of thing. Okay.
The same as some guy who like has an art degree.
Okay, so that's it. So now CGC, it's not a professional grading service. He's just basically saying they have an art degree, so therefore they know about conditions of comics. The art degree and condition of he actually just, this is stuff that's just, he's throwing stuff against the wall because he actually doesn't know.
Like, it's because what is the degree those people have or thing that they have training wise that allows them to be able to tell you the condition? It just seems sort of sideways.
It's not sideways at all. Again, they have a standard at CGC, well defined, based on a long history of grading and criteria. So go back to Overstreet price guides from the 1970s and the 80s when I was looking at them, and there was a criteria of what, we didn't really have mint, but we had near mint and very fine, very good, whatever. And you kind of had a general idea of how many fold. You would learn, you would understand what those criteria are. These are people that are trained in that. I would assume they don't have degrees for this. I don't know why you would waste the time or money to have a degree. I assume there's some sort of training and licensing or certification that CGC or the other companies have, because there is other companies. It's not just CGC. CGC is the biggest, most common, and the one that carries the most premium. Anyway.
Yeah. We got a super chat. Got engaged.
And then they just changed how you just see Black Angus and Rook don't really. Rook definitely didn't know. Black Angus doesn't appear to know. And that's kind of how it goes. So the conversation just goes a little sideways on me, kind of stopped me. I actually don't think I watched more than like a couple more minutes. I kind of jumped around a little bit to see what was happening and things like that, but it's just not my scene. And to know that, just look, don't get out over the skis, folks. If you don't know what CGC is, or say, I don't know, I'm not an expert in that, I don't know how to, this is what it is, this is what I understand it to be, that kind of thing. But don't just start demeaning what it is and who these people are and what it represents and that kind of thing. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer what I've learned and what I know. I would assume that I would learn a ton if I went to CGC and was trained to grade, because I'm assuming there's a million things that I don't know. And I'm assuming that with what I've learned about the equipment that these companies use, like PSA is another one with trading cards, the amount of computers and magnifiers and even AI at some companies to help identify imperfections and problems is so next level that it's silly to make random comments about being like having a degree in art and not knowing anything. So anyway, this is my take on it. Sorry, this is the closest thing you get to like derailing my brain. I totally went off on like a tangent because I was like, because I don't really care about all this comic book, comic gate Eric July drama stuff. I mean, I've looked at the books. I've been my opinions, my comments, and I'd be more than happy to talk about those. But the CGC thing is like this random thing that was just kind of thrown in this conversation, and I thought I would address it. So take care, everybody. I am Pops.